Well, my name is Martin Merriman, and my friend here is Jerry Bergman. And how long have you been associated with Jehovah's Witnesses, Derek?
Well, my father was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. He was one of the first in Ireland to become a witness. So I've been around Jehovah's Witnesses all my life, although I didn't become interested until about 5 years ago. And I'm baptised about 4 years now, I reckon. I'm associated still at the moment with the Dunleary congregation just on the outskirts of Dublin. And I'm just at the moving out of the congregation because of moving house, but I'm still in association with that congregation.
Right. And I've been associated with the Dublin congregations for 14 years. Liz and myself, that's my wife. And we've pioneered together. And I've been an elder for the past 7 years. I've held various positions in the congregation. I've been Watchtower study conductor, school overseer, and at the assemblies I usually overseen the department handling the field service at the big assemblies, and at the circuit assemblies I was the literature overseer, and I'd given various talks at the assemblies and so forth. Also, I've been asked on occasion to go out and help a congregation that perhaps needed a bit of help outside the Dublin area, and I done that and I enjoyed it, and for 13 and a half of those 14 years I've known nothing but happiness and joy as being one of Jehovah's Witnesses in Ireland. But then the September Watchtower, 15th Watchtower, came out in 1981, and it was the article dealing with disfellowshipping and disassociation.
You were a Watchtower conductor at that time?
Yeah, that's right, I've been taking a Watchtower. Now, when I seen that material on disassociation, as far as I was concerned, I couldn't see any scriptural basis for the points being made in it. Disfellowshipping, yes, I agree entirely with the idea of disfellowshipping. It's in the scriptures, and there's no problem with that. And I think it's nice if you have a group of people, you have cleanliness and so forth. But on this specific point of disassociation, no, and it bothered me. Now, it's always been my understanding that when you have the truth, you've absolutely nothing to fear, and you can question whatever needs to be questioned. So I done the best I could with this material in the September 15 Watchtower, but I just couldn't come to terms with it scripturally. I couldn't find a basis in scripture for it. So not too long after that Watchtower, I resigned from taking the Watchtower study.
Had you conducted it in the congregation? That particular
I did
article?
actually conduct the material, and that in itself affected me.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke with a number of the other fellow elders about it, and like they couldn't come up with a scriptural basis either for disassociation. Now, things went fairly quiet. I still remained an elder, but I just didn't take the Watchtower study. And then around March, I seen the Time article on Ray Franz. I actually seen it at the end of February, beginning of March. And I read the article dealing with Ray Franz being disfellowshipped for having a single meal with a disassociated man. Now, I just couldn't believe that. That was unthinkable, that a man could devote 40 years of his life and be kicked out for having a meal with a disassociated person. So I didn't believe it. So when the brothers in the congregation started coming to me about it, concerned about, hey Martin, did you see the article on Ray Franz? You know, ex-member of the governing body disfellowshipped for having a meal with a disassociated person. I said, I don't believe it. But the truth of the matter was that the interview with Raymond Franz was a fairly nice interview as they go. It wasn't antagonistic, it didn't attack the organisation, and with the result I felt I had to check it out a bit more. Excuse me, a bit more. That's the 7-Up I've been drinking. So next of all, I phoned up Ann Constable, one of the writers of the article in New York, and the other chap, I've forgotten his name at the moment, but if you get the Time article, you'll see both the names. So I phoned that constable up in New York. I told her that I felt her magazine had a cheek printing a biased article like that against their organisation, and I honestly felt that way. I felt the organisation was wonderful, it was marvellous, all the great work it had done, and I just wanted this straightened out. So she said to me, well, I can understand you being upset. She said, quite a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses have been phoning into the Time offices here, and I'm telling you, Mr. Merriman, what I told the other people, the other Jehovah's Witnesses who phoned up, to speak to your governing body. So I said, why didn't you speak to our governing body? She said, I went to speak to them, but they had no comment. Well, that didn't sit right with me. That, we could have answered, surely we could have answered this claim that a man was disfellowshipped for having a single meal. It wouldn't have hurt. So there and then my friend and I, John May, that's Derek's older brother, and he's been associated for 15 years and an elder in the same body of elders as myself, and he's a very well respected brother in Ireland, and both of us decided there and then that we had to find out, get to the bottom of this. So 2 elders in good standing, we flew to New York.
Wasn't he pioneering also?
Oh, John was a regular pioneer, absolutely, yeah.
For about 11 years.
Yeah, 11 years. He's written many articles in defence of Jehovah's Witnesses. I forgot to mention, actually, John and I dealt with the Department of Justice to gain entry into the prisons to have Bible studies with people who were interested in Jehovah's Witnesses. We've been dealing for 10 years with the government to try and get a piece of ground to build a Kingdom Hall for Jehovah's Witnesses. I myself went to the Secretary for Education in the Republic of Ireland, because in the schools there they teach the Catholic religion, and I got an undertaking from them that my children wouldn't be taught religion and they could be excused from the classroom, and that's precisely what happened. So we weren't taking it lying down, this religion of ours. We believed it was the truth, and we were going to do something about it. So that's why we felt so disturbed about this material. John felt the same way over the September 15 Watchtower. So we flew to New York in March, and we then flew down to Gadsden, Alabama. We spent 5 days and nights with Ray Franz and Peter Gregerson. I questioned them, and so did John, very closely about this whole affair. And I got a copy of the correspondence between Ray Franz and the Judicial Committee in Gadsden, Alabama, with the brothers' names on it: Theodis French, Edgar Bryant, and it was initially Dan Gregerson, but as he had a personal kind of contact with the case, he was replaced by Larry Johnson. So we had all the documents, we read them over, we looked at the material, and we said, right, there are questions to be answered, we would like them answered. So naturally, where would you go to find the answer? You'd go to your governing body. And we had full confidence, absolutely no doubt in our minds, that the governing body would meet with us and straighten this whole affair out. No question. So we flew from Alabama to California, and from California to Texas, and then up to Brooklyn, New York. We were staying with brothers all the while, and we'd a nice visit with those brothers, and we had some very good conversations about the matter in Alabama. But from what we could detect, the brothers had misunderstood the whole situation. They were talking about Ray Franz being disfellowshipped for apostasy, which he wasn't. He was disfellowshipped for having a single meal with a disassociated man. And the rumour was going around that Peter Gregerson went off with a cute little blonde, and some of the circuit overseers were spreading this rumour about, as we discovered in California and in Texas. So let me set the record absolutely straight. I stayed in Peter Gregerson's home with his wife Janet. They have 7 children. They're a lovely couple. There's absolutely no truth in the rumour that he went off with anybody. And anyhow, we phoned up Jack Barr, a member of the governing body. Now the reason we phoned up Jack Barr was that his wife Mildred, lo and behold, she was the very one that contacted John May's father in Dublin, Ireland. She was a missionary there at one time and helped him into the truth. So We spoke to Jack on the phone, Jack Barr on the phone. As I said, he was a member of the governing body. And we said immediately, Jack, we've been down in Gadsden, Alabama. We spent 5 days and nights with Ray Franz and Peter Gregerson. And we want to talk to our governing body because we're disturbed. We have some questions that we wish to have answered. So his reply was, you were where? So we told him where we were. And he said, do you think that was wise? So John, his brother, said to him, John May said to him, well, Jack, it may not be wise organisationally, but we're lovers of truth. And the truth is what's important. And what we'd like you to do is to present our petition, if you like, to the governing body that we want to meet with them. And he said, well, he wouldn't do that. He didn't feel he could do that. So we asked him, well, look, if we phone another member of the governing body, namely Lyman Swingle, he was the chairman of the governing body for that year, would you meet with us then? If he proposed it, would you back him up? He said he would. He said, I'm having breakfast with Lyman Swingle in the morning, I'll tell him you phoned, and then you can phone him up yourself. So we said, great, Jack. So the next morning we phoned up Lyman Swingle. John got on the phone to him. So he said to him, Brother Swingle, I'm John May. And Brother Swingle said to him, I know who you are. He says, you're the fella who spent 5 days and nights with a disassociated and disfellowship man in Gadsden, Alabama. And John said, that's right. So Brother Swingle said, you know, do you think you're a knight in shining armour travelling across the galaxy, or words to that? I'm not sure what he used, the word galaxy. Hemisphere, I think, was the word he used. To right the wrongs, a knight in shining armour. John said no, he didn't consider himself to be that, but that he did have serious questions that he would like answered. So Brother Swingle said, you know, we're not going to meet with you. So John asked him to phone up the branch in Dublin. Phone Arthur Matthews, Fred Metcalf or Peter Andrews. They're the branch committee in Dublin. Find out the kind of men we are. You'll find that we're not here to make trouble. We're here because we want sincere, honest discussion with you and need some questions to be answered so as we can help the brothers and sisters back home. So he said no. So that went on for 15 minutes or so. So next I get on the phone and I introduced myself to Brother Swingle, and I told him that I also wanted to meet with him. And he said, no, we're not meeting with you. So I said, I can't believe that you're saying you won't meet with us. I said, if I go home and tell my brothers and sisters back in Ireland that you won't meet with us, that the governing body won't meet with us, I said, they'll call me a liar. I said to him, we go out on the doors in Ireland bragging about how we're not like the Catholic Church. If you wanted to see the bishop or someone like that, you couldn't get in to see him. But we can go to our governing body if we ever have a problem. And now you're telling me you won't meet with us. He said there is no precedent for meeting with you. So I said, well, Brother Swingle, may I respectfully bring to your attention what it says in Acts chapter 15. That Paul and Barnabas went up to Jerusalem to meet with the governing body. So he said, oh, so you think you're Paul and Barnabas now? And I was deeply hurt and shocked when he said that to me, because I didn't expect... I mean, the brothers at home wouldn't say that to me. An ordinary elder in the congregation would never say that to you. Is that a fact there?
No, that's incredible. What, you know, the brothers at home were shocked when we told them this.
Yeah, they really were. So, and anyhow, he said, put it in writing. So I explained to him, I'm not the best at writing. I can read and write very well, but I don't express myself very well on paper. I don't think so, in anyhow. And I said, anyhow, I've travelled 6,000 miles. I said to him, you know, why not just meet with us? He said, put it in writing. So this went on for another 20 minutes. And he said, why did you do it? Why did you go to a disfellowship man and a disassociated man? And I said, Brother Swingle, I said, if it was you or any other member of the governing body, John and I would call on you just the same. We're all brothers. Why can't we resolve these matters together? We have serious questions. I said, 14 years ago I was a Roman Catholic. Jehovah's Witnesses came to me. They raised questions in my life that I couldn't answer. So I went along to the priest, the local parish priest. And he said, well, come in and sit down. He gave me tea and biscuits. Now, he couldn't answer any of my questions, I said, Brother Swingle. But at least he paid me the courtesy of sitting down and talking to me. Now, I said to Brother Swingle, and you'll find out later how you can prove this one way or the other if you want to, any of you. I said to Brother Swingle, I'm not asking you to meet with me. I said, I'm not telling you to meet with me. I said, I am begging you to meet with me. Because I am now at the crossroads again that I was at 14 years ago. I am confused, I am disturbed, I am upset, and I simply want my shepherds to help me. And they are my words. So, he said, put it in writing. That was the curt, crisp, sarcastic response I got from him. So I'll be honest with you, I was annoyed. I felt like saying all sorts of things. Who wouldn't? We're all human. So, I didn't. I wished him Jehovah's blessing. I said I would certainly pray for him because I felt that he did need prayer with an attitude like that. Being an elder and having that attitude. And we left him with our telephone number and told him we'd wait to call. And we waited 3 days and they didn't call. So we got the plane back home to Shannon. And on the way home, John and I were really shocked and upset. I mean, our whole world seemed so gloomy and dull. We'd gone there full of hope, full of loyalty, if you like, thinking our questions were going to be answered, and there wasn't even an attempt to even hear the questions. So we got into Shannon, and we went home. So that week, that was the very week, we got home on the Saturday, and the following Saturday, Brother Lloyd Barry was coming on his own visit to Dublin. So, you know, in my heart of hearts I thought to myself, well, maybe he'll meet with us then. Maybe he'll have been instructed to meet with us. But Saturday came and went, and Brother Barry didn't meet with us. So, the following week, when he left, we got a phone call from the branch, Brother Arthur Matthews. He is the branch coordinator in Dublin. And he said, I heard you were in America. He phoned John up. We want to meet with you. The branch committee want to meet with you. So, John and I went to him. And one of the branch committee was away, Brother Fred Metcalf. So we met with Brother Arthur Matthews, the branch coordinator, and another member of the branch committee, Peter Andrews. And we sat down with them. Yes, we told them we had been to America. Yes, we'd been with Ray Franz and Peter Gregerson. And we explained why we'd done it and what we hoped to achieve. And Arthur and Peter listened to us. And they questioned us a little bit about our stay over there and so forth. And we left after about 2.5 hours of conversation. Incidentally, one of the very disturbing points that came up in our discussion was that Ray Franz was disfellowshipped for having the meal with Peter Gregerson, but Cynthia Franz, his wife, was present on the occasion of the meal, and nothing happened to her, so we couldn't fathom that one, and I don't know whether any of you can. So next of all, we left, we went home, and the very next morning, Brother Arthur Matthews, the branch coordinator, phoned up John May. He said, John, we forgot to ask you one question. And John said, what's that? And he said, well, we want an undertaking from you that you're not going to talk about the things that went on in the United States of America. So John said he would give them that undertaking. John came to me and he said to me, Arthur had phoned them up and wanted to know what the situation was with me. So I said, no, I wouldn't give that undertaking. I didn't know what I was going to do, but that was how I felt about it. Now, I have left out one very important point. If you remember, I said to you earlier that you can verify our conversation with Brother Lyman Swingle. Well, the reason you could verify it is all you have to do is contact Brooklyn, because Arthur Matthews told us that Brother Lyman Swingle taped our conversation without telling us what he'd done. And a copy of that tape, along with a private memo, was sent to the branch in Ireland to investigate us and find out about us. Now, I found that extremely disappointing and disgusting, because there we travelled 6,000 miles to sit down and talk with them. They had no time to talk with us there and then, but yet they could send a tape to the other side of the world along with a memo to investigate us. So that was very disturbing. So nothing happened after that for about 6 months, until, let's say, about 6-8 weeks ago. Now, John and I, in the country as a whole, in Ireland as a whole, are very well known brothers, and it wasn't unusual for us to receive requests from other brothers or sisters, perhaps needing help for one reason or another. And what happened in the past 8 weeks really was proof of our involvement with the brothers on a countrywide basis, because John received a telephone call from a brother in Portlaoise, which is about 60 miles from Dublin. He's got a wife and 4 children. The wife was in hospital. She was having problems. The doctors were trying to press blood transfusion on her. He was down the country. He asked us to go in and to support her. So we did. We went in to see her, and we had a good chat with her, and we prayed with her, and we spoke to the doctors for her. But when we left, John and I had a conversation, because through all of this, the question of blood had been on our minds, and we had reviewed the material in the Society's publications and in the Holy Bible, and we discovered that, in point of fact, Jehovah's Witnesses were taking blood already, and that according to the Bible, it was a matter of conscience. That was the conclusion we'd come to. Now, some people might say, well, how are we taking blood already? Well, all you have to do is you check the June the 15th Watchtower of 1978, and it's the questions from readers dealing with serums and vaccinations. And there's an inherent contradiction in the material which astounded me, because I read it in 1978 and never spotted it. But I've read it since, and it's so clear that you could take serums containing blood components and extract, and indeed some serums contain whole blood, although a small quantity, but some do contain whole blood. Now, the article made the point that if it was to save your life you couldn't have a blood transfusion or use the components of blood, but it was to help you get over an illness. Say, like, you could use it in a tetanus injection, or an anti-D injection, dealing with the rhesus business, women developing antibodies in their body, or the very haemophiliacs, they take an injection called factor 8. They could take blood into their bodies to help them get over an illness, but to save your life you can't take blood. Well, that's a contradiction.
The article actually said that some brothers think that just because it contains a small amount of blood,
Right.
that they leave it to their conscience. So, you're saying you can take a small amount if your conscience allows you, but what constitutes a small amount? And we can see no difference between a small amount of blood and which they would imagine would be in a vaccination or in an injection. Between that or a pint of blood.
Right. That's right. Jesus said, "He that's faithful in little is faithful in much," and that was the principle. So, with those thoughts in mind, the reason we've digressed a little bit there is to give you an idea as to why the problem arose with this sister, in fact, she wasn't even baptized, but she was in the hospital. She was the wife of a baptized witness. So we contacted the man by telephone, and he drove up to Dublin the very next morning before the operation. John had breakfast with him in a restaurant in town, explained how he felt about the situation, and said, look, it's up to yourself. You know, we're not telling you to take a blood transfusion. It is entirely up to yourself. So the man decided that his wife wouldn't have a blood transfusion, and thank God she had her operation and she didn't need blood and she was all right, and that's great, and we're delighted about that. But at least we cleared our conscience. Now in the next few weeks we had 3 other situations just like that from various parts of the country dealing with blood transfusion.
And that just goes to show how respected John and Martin were, because these brothers came to John and Martin over these issues rather than going to local elders, because they were so well known.
So, and anyhow, the people that we spoke to about blood transfusion, they started obviously talking to their friends. I mean, it was extraordinary that John May and Martin Merriman were saying these things. We would have been considered the last people in the world, in Ireland, and anyhow, to talk about these matters in this way.
Actually, in fact, since the time they came back from America, they didn't say anything for about 6 months. But I work for John, and we see each other every morning, and we read a portion of the Bible every morning before we go out to work. We read
all the workers.
All the workers,
Yeah.
a whole lot of us. And I noticed a change in John's attitude towards the reading of the Bible since that time. And I got worried about him. I thought he was falling out of the truth. So I actually went to one of my elders and, asked them, what can I do to help John? And we had a chat about it, and I had a chat to John, and he assured me that he wasn't falling out of the truth, that he was okay, there was nothing to worry about, which it made me feel better. But little did I know what was going on.
Right. So, word got around that things weren't as they always had been for Martin Merriman and John May as regard our association with the organisation and that. So next of all, the circuit officer was sent in called Ewan Watt. Ewan Watt's a little Scots brother, and I've known Ewan for how long do I know Ewan? About 7 or 8 years, and he hastily called a meeting with our body of elders before the school and service meeting. He called a meeting at 7 o'clock, and our meeting starts at 7:30, and he called the elders into the Kingdom Hall, and he took them into the back room, and he told them that he was there to form a committee to deal with John May and myself. So on that body of elders, naturally we've some very close friends. We've served on the body of elders for years. They came out of the room and told us that he was forming, the circuit officer was forming a judicial committee to meet with us. So when Brother Watt, Ewan Watt, the circuit officer, came out of the room, he called John outside of the Kingdom Hall while the meeting was going on, and he spent 45 minutes outside with John May. Now, John came in and told me that Brother Ewan Watt wanted me outside in his car to have a conversation. So I said to John, well, what's it all about, John? And he said, well, he said, he's discussing with me about a trip to America, and John had the file with him, the Ray Franz file, which when you read it for yourself, shows absolutely clearly that the man was disfellowshipped for having one single meal with a disassociated man, and nothing else. There was no other reason for his disfellowshipping. It also demonstrates that the case was handled very hastily, not at all in accord even with the society's direction of taking time to study matters and always, view what the Bible has to say about things, do not be hasty and so forth, and this was done with the greatest haste in the world. And anyhow, John had the material with him and offered it to Brother Ewan Watt to read, to enable him to get a clear picture of why John was feeling as he was feeling, and why I felt that way. And Brother Watt said to him, listen, he said, what is true or false, right or wrong, is not important. Is it in harmony with the society's policy, and are you talking about it? Now that's what he said. So John said to me he didn't like the sound of that. So I went out to the car, and then he had to meet Ewan Watt. We sat in the car, and Ewan said, well, what's it all about? So I said, well, what do you know about it? And he said, well, I've just arrived in Dublin from the north of Ireland, so I don't really know anything. Nothing. But I want to meet with you with a committee on Saturday, if that's convenient. So I said, well, what is the nature of the committee? And he said, it's investigative. So I pointed out to him that according to the Kingdom School textbook and to the Society's direction, that that is not the way you go about investigating. Normally a body of elders will appoint perhaps 2 brothers to go and meet with the person to ascertain is there a case to be answered. Then you go back and report to the body of elders. Then you form a committee. Then you invite people to a hearing. I said, now this is a bit like the cart before the horse. So he insisted that there was going to be a committee hearing, and that was the end of it. So I asked him, was it judicial? And he said, no. The 2 elders on that body of elders heard him categorically say it was judicial. Anyhow, in the time we were conversing, John May came back out of the Kingdom Hall, asked me to get out of the car. I excused myself, got out and spoke to John. John said to me, look at Martin, I feel they want to meet with me on Friday night. They're not going to read this evidence. I don't feel there's any point in me meeting with them, because I feel I probably will get the same treatment that Ray Franz got. So John said, I'm having my letter of resignation read out tonight. So he asked me, did I want my letter read out? And I said, no. So John went back into the Kingdom Hall, and 15 minutes later or so he came back out, and Ewan Watt and I got out of the car, and John said to Ewan, look Ewan, you've said what is true or false, right or wrong, doesn't matter. What mattered was it out of harmony with the society's policy, and was it talking about it? So John said, I'm not meeting with you. He said, I've spent 15 years in association with the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. I've been happy, but I cannot conscientiously go along with something that violates what the Bible says. So he said to Ewan, it's been nice knowing you, and he put out his hand to shake hands with Ewan Watt. And after 15 years of knowing that man, and the kind of man that John May is, he's a wonderful Christian man. He's my friend, I know that. I grew up on the same street as him. I know I'm biased, but you can go to any brother and sister in the Republic or the north of Ireland, any brother and sister, and I include Arthur Matthews, who's the branch coordinator, Fred Metcalf, Peter Andrews, they're the branch committee, and you ask them, any one of them, is John May a good or an evil man? And they will tell you John May is a good man, and he is a good man. And on that night, Ewan Watt shamed himself by turning away and not taking that man's hand. And the brothers and sisters in the congregation were very upset about that, and are still very upset about it. So, and anyhow, one word borrowed another. John went off home. My wife was there. She was very upset with Ewan's treatment of John. She sat in Ewan Watt's car with me, and she pressed him about the nature of the committee again. And he said, yes, well, you could say it was judicial. But I said, you said to me it wasn't judicial. He says, well, a committee is a committee. So anyhow, I pointed out to him that it's all right to view it like that if your head wasn't on the chopping block, but if it was your head, you wouldn't view a committee as a committee as a committee. you'd want to know what this committee is and what it was about. So he then said to me, well, will you meet with us tomorrow night? And I said, I won't meet with you tomorrow night. I said, it's too soon. I said, and besides, I have 4 kids and a wife to support. I've got to go to work tomorrow. I'm going into the country, and I don't know what time I'll be back at. I said, Saturday you said, and Saturday it is. So he said, fair enough. So we were on our way home that night, and we called into a brother's home, Brother Peter Doyle, presiding overseer. Now he read out John May's resignation that night, and he resigned from being an elder that very night too, because of the treatment that the circuit overseer was meting out to John May and myself, and he wasn't going to be a party to it, so he resigned that night. So when I got to Peter's house, Peter Doyle's house, he'd been an elder, by the way, for about 9 years. He'd served in Dublin, and he'd served in Scotland, in the British Isles. So he was a man of quite experience. And anyhow, when I got to Peter's house, there was John May and his wife Yvonne. And that very night, 40 brothers and sisters came to Peter's home. And a number of them disagreed with John and myself, perhaps on the viewpoint we'd taken. But what they disagreed even more strongly with was the treatment of society, namely the governing body, the branch office and the circuit overseer was trying to mete out to us. And they shook hands with John, and they told him they will eat and drink with him any time they feel like it. And they are, any time. There's a stream of people to John's home, any day of the week. Anyhow, I met with, before I met with them on the Saturday, I sent a letter to our to our body of elders, the local body of elders, requesting 3 things, really 4 things. The first one was, I wanted a written invitation to the meeting, you know, where it was going to be and what time, which I think is a fairly normal procedure. And then I wanted 3 things that I felt were in harmony as well and fairly normal. 1, I wanted to know the makeup of the committee that would hear my case. 2, what were the accusations being made against me? And 3, who were my accusers? And I felt that was a reasonable request. So I passed this letter on to our body of elders. They passed it on to the circuit overseer. The circuit overseer, when I got home from work the next day, was sitting in my front room in my house. And we had a discussion that night, and it centered around whether I could have this invitation in writing. And he said there was no need for that I wasn't entitled to have it in writing. And I pointed out to him that it was normal procedure to invite a brother, and I'm asking for it in writing. So after 3 hours, I had to get him a small, tiny piece of paper out of my children's school book. And if you want to knock that off, I will actually get you. So this in fact is the piece of paper in question, and as you can recall, the 3 points that I wished to have clear with them was who made up the committee, who are the accusers, my accusers, and what were the accusations. So it took me 3 hours for Brother Watt, the circuit overseer, to write this. He wrote it in pencil. And he said, when I asked him, why did he not want to write it out? He says, well, if you're disfellowshipped, you'll use it against me.
Incredible, isn't it?
So, and anyhow, after 3.5 hours, he wrote this in pencil, and on condition that I return it to him at the hearing, which I didn't. It says on it, anyhow, point number 1, this was the committee, E.G. Watt, he'll be the chairman. 1 member of the branch committee, that turned out to be Brother Arthur Matthews, he's the branch coordinator, Brother Noel May, and he had Brother Oliver MacDonald, who I objected to, who was going around spreading rumour and gossip about Derek's brother, and who in fact had to be counselled by some of the brothers, local brothers in the congregations for his conversations. So that was the first one, the makeup of the committee. The second, he said there was no accusations and there were no accusers. So I said, well, what am I going for? So this is what he wrote down. He says, the point of the meeting is to discuss with you the current situation that is disturbing the congregations. So that's what he wrote down. After 3.5 hours he wrote those 2 points. I said, that's fine. I said, now I'd like you to date it and to sign it. So he wouldn't do that. That took me another half hour. And that's when he said to me, I'm taking a risk with you. You know, I hope you'll return it to me on Saturday at the meeting. So that's the piece of paper there. Little bitty piece of paper. So, that week, Brother Watt went around the various members in the congregation, questioning them about John May and myself. And as soon as he'd leave a brother or sister, they would phone me up and tell me that Brother Watt had been there and the questions that he'd been asking about me. So Brother Watt met with me before the hearing. I think it was on the Thursday or the Friday night. And he told me he was shocked that people distrusted him. That they wouldn't answer his questions. So I pointed out to him that he was questioning him about John May and myself, and the brothers knew how much we loved them, and they loved us. We're friends. Not only elders, but we've been their friends all these years. So why would they want to hurt us? We don't want to hurt them. Anyhow, Saturday dawned, and by the time Saturday had come around, there was anywhere from 40 to 60 brothers and sisters wanted to come forward and testify on my behalf as to the kind of man I have been for 14 years in the congregation. So I settled for 20 of them. 20 witnesses came forward on my behalf, offered themselves willingly. I didn't request them. They offered to come. And we met on the Saturday afternoon at the Dunleary Kingdom Hall. And the brothers were left outside, as is normal with the judicial hearings of Jehovah's Witnesses. They were left outside, and I sat in there in front of the 4 men, and I went through the same story I've told you now. And they listened to it, and Arthur Matthews repeated what he had said to us on the first meeting that Jan and I had with the branch committee, that our motives were never called into question, that he knew the kind of men we were, that we had slaved for the brothers and slaved for the organisation, and that there was no question as to our motives. So there was 20 brothers and sisters present who came forward as witnesses on my behalf. After an hour and a half of meeting with them, I also pointed out to the committee when Brother Matthews asked me where was all this fear and suspicion coming from. I pointed out to him what I'd gone through with the circuit overseer to get this little piece of paper from him. And I also pointed out to him that a lot of the suspicion and fear came from Brooklyn, when they wouldn't meet with their own brothers who were elders in the congregation just to sit down and discuss things as mature men. That breeds suspicion and fear. You ask yourself, what are they got to hide? What are they afraid of? That's what comes to a normal person's mind. So anyhow, we met with the committee. I met with the committee that afternoon, and it went on for about 4.5, 5 hours maybe. Now, incidentally, one of the committee members was a brother, Noel May. Now that's Derek's other brother, Noel. Now, Noel's wife phoned me up on the Friday night before the hearing, and she said, I know you're going before a hearing, Martin, and I know my husband's on the committee, but I want to come forward and speak on your behalf. So I said, oh, that's very kind of you, Carol. Carol May is her name. That's really nice of you. But I said, you've got 4 kids, 4 children. I said, you know, who's going to babysit them? And I said, also, you might embarrass your husband. So she says, well, you know, I want to do it. I said, well, go and ask your husband. So she popped in and asked Noel. And Noel sent out word. She came back on the phone and said, certainly. So the next day came, and she couldn't get a babysitter for the 4 kids. So I said, well, that's all right. So what she done was, she sent a note to the committee in a sealed envelope with her husband, and it's to Noel May's credit, as a member of the committee, he brought his wife's little note, and I'd like to read it to you, right? It was to the committee. It said, "Dear brothers, I would just like to write to say that in conversations with Brother Merriman," that's me, "and also in talking to other brothers who have spoken to me about this matter, Martin has endeavoured to calm the situation and is quite willing, happy in fact, to sit down and discuss things reasonably. I know when approached by certain brothers wanting to know what was involved, he has refused to discuss anything with them. Whenever I have spoken with Martin, he has always said that he genuinely wants to remain one of Jehovah's Witnesses and just wants to have his questions answered. With you serving Jehovah, Carol May." And I thought that was a beautiful little note, and it was very courageous of Carol to do that, and I'll always treasure that she done that. So I read that to the committee, and that was the tone of all of the brothers who appeared before the committee. That's the kind of thing they had to say, and that was the truth. I simply wanted honest questions answered. I didn't want to cause trouble. So by the end of the hearing, the committee informed me that I was cleared and that I was a brother in good standing in the congregation and so forth. But it developed at that meeting that the circuit overseer, Brother Ewan Watt, had gone around the various congregations in Dublin and had arranged a talk to be given on apostasy in the congregations. Well, it had been established there was no apostasy. It was ridiculous. So Brother Noel May pointed out to him that first of all he'd no right to go into the congregation and simply override the brothers in oversight there and arrange these talks, that it was causing fear and upset and bad feeling. So the branch overseer, coordinator, Brother Arthur Matthews, he agreed, and the talks were actually cancelled on apostasy, and they gave a talk on the faithful and discreet slave and loyalty to the organisation, which is fine. There's no problem with that if that's what they wanted to do, but not on apostasy. So I went off home, and next of all, there were so many brothers, and is so many brothers, upset in the Irish field. Tremendous number of brothers. At the congregation meetings, some of the meetings are being interrupted by the brothers, questioning the brother on the platform who is using the platform to make his point and drive it home, when it has in fact been proven by that committee that there is no need for all of this, that there are genuine questions and that they needed to be addressed. Now the questions fall into 2 or 3 areas. There are a number of serious questions, but the first question is on blood transfusion. That's the first question. The second one is on neutrality. It seems that in different parts of the world, Jehovah's Witnesses are not as neutral as I've always been led to believe, and I simply wanted that ironed out, and certainly that needs to be ironed out to satisfy all the brothers and sisters at home. And the third one was on the faithful and discreet slave. Certain serious questions. For example, who are the faithful and discreet slave? You know, is it the governing body? Is it the great crowd, which the majority of the writing department in Brooklyn are of the great crowd? Or is it the 10,000 brothers around the world who take the emblems but who do no writing? Do not feed the domestics their food at the proper time. So that was a question. It wasn't an attack, and isn't an attack. It's simply an ordinary question. And the brothers and sisters back home need that answered as well. So they had all these questions themselves then, the various congregations. The elders couldn't answer it, the branch couldn't answer it, so they sent to Brooklyn, and Brother Jack Barr came over with Brother Bob Petty. Now in the meantime, before Brooklyn had agreed to send anyone over, Derek's other brother Jared had offered to pay for the branch committee or members of the branch committee, myself and Noel, his brother, or John, his brother, to go to Brooklyn to meet with the governing body. Even at this late stage, he would pay for absolutely everything. It wouldn't cost the society a red cent. It wouldn't cost the local branch any money. So Arthur Matthews, the branch coordinator, thought that was a nice offer and certainly have it looked into. But as it turned out, they decided to send representatives from Brooklyn to Ireland. Well, Brother Jack Barr and Bob Pevy arrived on the Thursday. What date is today? It was last month. The last weekend last month. On the Thursday. And they met with the Dublin congregations. Just the Dublin congregations. Now the brothers were going there in expectation of having their questions answered. But instead what they got was Brother Pevy got up and gave them a talk on loyalty to the organisation and wicked men coming into the congregations and causing division and all this. And the brothers were looking around wondering where all these wicked men who were causing divisions were. Because as far as we were concerned, there was none in Ireland. So he looked at his watch and anyhow at the end of his talk and said, "Oh, I've got 3 minutes left," he said, and oh yes, there was this question on blood transfusion and blood. And he made a very feeble attempt to answer that. And I say that with sincerity and not with sarcasm. But to talk for maybe an hour and a half and to allow 3 minutes to such a serious question, you know, doesn't convey the idea that it's been treated very seriously. So I think, Derek, you went up and had a conversation with Brother Pevy about his talk on blood.
Yeah. Before these issues, I found out about these issues. My brother Jared's baby died. He was only a couple of days old. And, you know, I said to myself, if that baby had needed blood, I would have given it blood. So I thought to myself afterwards I was losing my faith. So I said I'd undertake a study of blood, which I did. And the more I studied it, the less convinced I was we were right on the stand that we take. So I'd been in discussions with the elders in my congregation in Dunleary, and they knew that I had this question before these issues arose. So I had an opportunity after the meeting to meet with Bob Pevy, and I thanked him for coming over and for giving this talk, but that he didn't really address the issue of the blood transfusions. So I had a few questions to ask him, and he tried to answer them, but the answers he gave were the pat answers that they normally give, were to abstain from blood, and that the Acts 15 says that we've to abstain, and that blood transfusions isn't abstaining. So he left me with something to think about. It gave me a question, and it was not really related to taking blood. So I said I'd look it up. So that was a Thursday evening. So we had a district assembly that weekend. A circuit assembly that weekend, and we drove down to New Ross, which is about 100 miles away.
Yeah, it's a 200-mile round trip.
It's about a 200-mile round trip. And after the morning session on the Saturday, Martin had already arranged to meet Jack Barr to have coffee with him.
That's right. I'll tell you about that in a minute.
And I said I'd try get to see Bob Pevy also. So I was standing at the entrance of the assembly hall, and after the meeting was over, Jack Barr and Bob Pevy headed out. So I walked with Bob out to the car, and I asked him I gave him the answer to the question he had, and he didn't acknowledge it, but he tried to give me some more things to think about on the blood issue. And he had to go. He was going back to Dublin. He couldn't waste any more time, and he left the question unanswered. So that's where I got with that brother from Brooklyn. He didn't answer my question, and he hadn't got time to stay and do it.
So now on the Thursday night, when the brothers from Brooklyn were giving the talk in Dublin, this was before the weekend assembly, circuit assembly, I went up to Brother Barr after his talk, and I spoke to him for about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. And I went up and I shook hands with him and said, you know, I'm the face behind the telephone call. And he said, oh, he looked at me, you know. So I said, I'm Brother Merriman. Oh, he said, Brother Merriman, it's good to see your face. So I said, well, that's very nice of you to say that, Brother Barr. I said, the only thing is, I would have rather heard it 6 months ago when I was in New York, when I wanted to see you and sit down and talk with you. So he had a conversation with me then. He pointed out to me that he didn't know where all these questions were coming from, that a few weeks ago he had spent a number of days with older brothers and sisters, 4,000 older brothers and sisters, 3,000 or 4,000 of them. He said, and they've no questions. Their faces are beaming with the truth, they've no questions. Well, that seemed a little strange to me, so I asked Brother Barr, had he spoken to each of these brothers and sisters, and asked them had they any questions, and he said, well, no, he hadn't. So I said, well, you can't really say then that they've no questions. And anyhow, I then got on to the conversation about the September 15 Watchtower, and he says, where are all these questions coming from? I said, do you want to know? He says, yeah, I do. I said, well, it comes from the September 15 Watchtower. I said, I cannot accept that Watchtower as being scriptural. It's not in the Bible. The two portions of scripture that are used in that Watchtower to support the argument on disassociated men and women fall into the category of John's letter that speaks about the Antichrist, and 1 Corinthians chapter 5, which speaks about all kinds of wickedness, strife, drunkenness, and stealing, and all this kind of thing, fornication. So I said my friend John May and Peter Gregerson didn't fall into those categories at all. So it couldn't be right. So he said, well, if you turn your back on the organization, you're turning your back on Jehovah and Jesus. And I said, no, you're not. Certainly not. Because you can disagree on the principle without turning your back on Jehovah, God and Jesus. And John May certainly hadn't turned his back on Jehovah, God and Jesus. But the Watchtower Society, I felt, had gone beyond the things that were written in God's Word. And I showed him the scripture in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 15. It's a pity I don't have a Bible here, but I can quote it for you if you like. It's the scripture that says, if anyone or someone calls the righteous man wicked, or if someone calls a wicked man righteous, even both of these people are detestable to Jehovah. Now that's a paraphrased version of the verse, but it's in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 15. When I spoke to Brother Barr about it, I said, now listen, I said, the Watchtower tells me to view John May, who is a good, decent man, isn't he, Arthur? Arthur Matthews was standing there, and Arthur said, John May is a righteous man. I said, thank you, Arthur, I agree with you. I said, now the Watchtower says I have to treat him as a wicked man. I said, on the other hand, the Bible tells me if I treat him as a wicked man, I'm detestable to Jehovah. I said, what am I to do, Brother Barr? He says, well, you have to follow the Bible. I said, thank you, I will. Because I intend to eat and drink with my friend anytime I want to. And I said to Brother Matthews, Arthur, you know it. I've told the branch I'm going to do this. I've told the local body of elders I'm going to do it. And I'm telling you, Brother Barr, this is what I'm going to do in the future. So he said, well, he said, we're going to have to do something about people who associate with disassociated people. And Derek's brother Noel was there, and he pointed out to him that there was no scriptural basis. And he's the presiding overseer, and he's still in very good standing in the congregation and in the organisation. But he said there were questions to be answered, and they needed to be answered. Are you going to address these questions? His body of elders have sent these questions into Brooklyn, and are waiting on the answers. And a number of other brothers and sisters have wrote individually to Brooklyn and are waiting for the answers to these serious, honest, genuine questions. So Brother Barr said he had to go. So I said, listen, I said, Arthur Matthews, I'd phoned him early in the week. I got him to promise me that he would ask you, would you have a private meeting with me to sit down at this late date even to discuss the matter. And Arthur said he would ask you. He said to Brother Barr. I said to Brother Barr. I said, now Arthur didn't phone me back, one way or the other. And Arthur Matthew said to me, that's the branch coordinator, he said, well, I've been very busy. And we were very busy. So I was disappointed about that, to be honest with you. So Brother Barr said to me, well, will you be at the assembly at the weekend? This assembly that Derek is talking about. I said, well, will you talk to me if I get down there? Will we have a cup of tea and a chat about these things? He says, yes. So I said, I'll go. So Derek and I and another brother, Ray Norton, made a 200-mile round trip. And when you know the roads in Ireland, that's a long, long trip. You know, I mean, that would be the equivalent of maybe 400 or 500 miles here. So we made that round trip. Now, I went down there to the assembly, looked for Brother Barr. I met Brother Matthews. He knew what I was there for. He'd heard the arrangement being made. And Brother Barr left without seeing me. And he never did see me. Although the branch had my phone number and he was returning to Dublin and he was there another day, he made no contact. So naturally I was disappointed about that. It's only human, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's actually that, it's not that he just didn't see it, it's that this moment the session was over, they were gone. Like I had to catch Jack Bob Heavy at the door, only for I was standing at the door. I walked him to the car. I mean, the sessions were over 5 minutes before they were gone.
Yeah. So, I was very disappointed about that. So we got back to Dublin and anyhow, and in the past few weeks, a number of brothers had resigned and the elders were trying to stop them from resigning. And the reason the brothers feel this way is because there's been no attempt to address the questions, the serious questions. None whatsoever. And the congregation that I've been associated with, the central congregation, it was one of the happiest congregations I've ever associated with in 14 years. Lovely brothers and sisters, and I love them and they love me, I know that. A number of them have stopped going on service. A number of pioneers have stopped. A number of the ministerial servants want to resign, and some elders. And not because they don't love Jehovah and Jesus, they do, very deeply and sincerely. And if you don't know anything about the work in Ireland, it would pay you to have a look at it, and you'll see the fight the brothers have to put up with there against the Catholic Church to stand for Jehovah. So they are deeply concerned and hurt, and it's a shame all of this has happened. But that's the way things have unfolded. Anyhow, in the past couple of weeks since Brother Barr's visit, the circuit overseer has remained, and a much harder attitude has been taken in regard to people who have questions. And the circuit overseer, along with another elder, has been visiting various ones of the brothers, and I suppose it's the shepherding. But when the brothers raise a question, he's asking them, well, you didn't think up that question, who gave you that question? So, on that basis, I knew what was going on. The brothers and sisters told me who had been visited by the circuit overseer. There's only one person that was left in the congregation, as John May had resigned. I was the only one left who had been to America and who had raised certain questions, honest questions, and he was asking them who told them the questions. So I got the impression there was a little bit of investigating still going on about Martin Merriman. So that concerned me and concerned the brothers and sisters, and it disturbed me. So I had some decisions to make. 6-7 months had gone by since last March. None of my questions had been answered. I'd been hauled before. The only time I'd met for any kind of discussion has been before a judicial hearing, which I'd never, in the 14 years I've been associated, never had 1 ounce of bother in the congregation. I've never had any reproof. I've never been before a committee, although I've sat on lots of committees myself. Never had it. And yet, the first time I ask an honest question, I'm brought before a judicial committee, and I couldn't understand that, and I still can't to this day, and that's being honest with you. So the next thing was, one of the elders informed me that a harder line was going to be taken with those who associated with John May. Well, I'd already stated my position in regard to that, so I knew that if I continued to associate with John and I remained as part of the organisation, or associated with the organisation, I was going to be disfellowshipped. Now, disfellowshipping is a terrible thing anywhere in the world. But if it happened to you in Ireland, see, in our country, we've been used to love, unity, warmth, fellowship, brotherhood, standing together. There's tremendous love amongst the brothers. We have not been used to fear. We could always, in all the years gone by, ask any question we liked. Even with the branch, even with Arthur Matthews. A lovely brother, he had my respect. But now there's fear there. And to be disfellowshipped in Ireland, I haven't known of one situation where a person's been disfellowshipped wrongly. Not one. So if you're disfellowshipped in Ireland, the brothers always assumed there was a very good reason. And up to this point, that would have been true. So if Martin Merriman had been disfellowshipped, then his wife and his 4 little children would have had to bear the stigma of the father and the husband being disfellowshipped. And I just couldn't let that happen to myself. I felt it was better to resign with dignity and with honour and with my name and reputation intact. So with that in mind, last Friday night I resigned from the association with the organisation, and I'd like to read this out to you and you'll see exactly what my feelings are toward it. It was to the body of elders in the central congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, Wesley Road, Rathgar, Dublin, dated the 27th of the 10th, 1982. Dear brothers, this is to inform you that Liz, that's my wife, and I hereby officially resign our association from the Watchtower Society. Our reasons are numerous and scriptural. Suffice it to give one example, namely the September 15th Watchtower of 1981, which we know goes beyond the things that are written in God's Word. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 6 specifically, when dealing with persons who have resigned association with the Watchtower Society on scriptural principle. Now, I've read that wrong, but what the basic point that I'm making is that in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 6, it's a warning not to go beyond the things that are written. So that's how I felt. I put that scripture in. It says, we wish to also inform you that our love for Jehovah God, for His Son Jesus, and the deep respect we hold for His holy word, the Bible, has not diminished in any way. Rather, it is out of a deep, heartfelt desire to please our Heavenly Father Jehovah, instead of any man or organisation, that we take this prayerful decision. Acts chapter 5 and verse 29. In conclusion, we would like to assure you of our Christian love and affection for our Christian brothers and sisters. Yours sincerely, Martin Merriman and Elizabeth Merriman. And I put a little postscript to this. Romans chapter 3 and verse 4, let God be found true, though every man be found a liar. And also, I would also like to draw your attention to Proverbs chapter 17 verse 15 for your serious consideration. And that's the one about calling the wicked man righteous, the righteous man wicked. So I resigned, my wife resigned on the 27th of the 10th, 1982 from association with the Watchtower Society. Not the Christian congregation, the Watchtower Society. So that's basically the story. Don't know whether you have any questions.
I was wondering what effect this might have on the preaching work in Ireland, the problems with the Watchtower Society.
Yeah. Well, if the truth gets out about what the society have been doing with regard to its members and in regard to various questions dealing with chronology and so forth and what's going on in the organisation, I believe that the preaching activity will be put back at least 50 years. I would suspect even there may be deeper results. Jehovah's Witnesses will probably be destroyed, their reputation be destroyed in Ireland from what's happened, because it's just unbelievable. It's not Christian. It's not even human, the treatment that the brothers and sisters are receiving from the society.
One of the things you mentioned too is that you mentioned that the brothers in Ireland just didn't have the fear that any kind of fears from the organization. What was your impression when you came over to America and looked at the congregations here as to did you see that type of fear here in that?
Well, when John and I came, we bought a Rambler ticket to fly to various states, and we were in 6 different states, and we spoke to brothers and sisters from various congregations and elders from various congregations from California to Alabama to Texas to New York State, and the brothers and sisters even in the Bethel, and everywhere they were apostate crazy. It was like McCarthyism. It was like Reds under the bed. Everywhere there was an apostate. Where's all these apostates? And I haven't met one in all my life. Never met an apostate. I asked one of the missionaries who's over there, Oliver MacDonald. In fact, sorry, I didn't ask him. My brother, my fleshly brother Frank, who's a baptized Jehovah's Witness. Incidentally, he's about to resign himself over this matter. He asked him, have you ever met one of these apostates? And he said, no. And I haven't met one single brother who's met an apostate as described in the Watchtower. No. So this fear is just completely new.
One other question I had too is you mentioned that you flew to different parts of the states and so forth. This is kind of a personal question, but I think it's one that needs to be answered. Are you a wealthy man to where this just came easy to you, that you just put out some money out of your pocket change and decided to fly around and well, as that brother put it, be the knight in shining armor? How is your standing there? I mean, was this something that was a great expense to you to do this?
Well, to fly to the United States cost me every single penny I had. Now, I'm not talking about excess money. I was in debt. My business, the little business, I was cleaning chimneys for a living before I left. And that round just folded. By the time I got back, there was just no business left. And it cost me a great deal of money. And my family, and though my wife was very willing, because we love the truth, we love God's Word, we love the brothers and sisters, and we just had to find out what was true. So she was willing to make that sacrifice too. So I'm far from being a wealthy man, far from being a wealthy man, and I think Derek can verify that.
Yeah, my candy's really tight. I don't mean that, but it did cost a lot of money, like John as well. It cost John a lot of money. And, he took most of that out of the business expenses, and we're still paying for it. We still got to work for it to pay it back. So we're in debt over it as well. So it has cost a great deal of expense. But I don't think that's what was the main major issue. I think the questions that were raised in that Time article was needing an answer. And as for the fear in the congregations, I'm associated with the Dunleary congregation, and we had such a great relationship in the congregation, nearly everybody in it. We were all friends, we regularly go to each other's homes for meals. The elders were the most helpful and loving elders that really I could ever meet. And we were trying to buy a house in the area we live in. It's just so expensive. And we own Brandy, my wife and I, and we decided to settle for a lower substandard home in order to remain in that congregation, but we couldn't even get one of those, so we had to move out of the area. So we've never experienced fear, and since I've come over to America, which is only a week now, I'm only in America a week, and I've heard some of the reports what's happening in the congregations around the country. I just can't believe that it's happening to a Christian community, a so-called Christian community. I know most of these things wouldn't happen at home because the brothers have a different outlook on life even. But I came over to America to see the elders in Gadsden, because I didn't really, in my heart, believe that these things were actually so. I thought things were exaggerated and things were in first hand or second hand and third hand. So I honestly believe that even after 6 months of it, that it could be resolved within the organisation. I certainly prayed that it would be. So I come over to America with the Raymond Franz file that Martin was talking about, that he offered to Ewan Watt, the circuit overseer. And while Jack Barr was in Dublin, he told Martin that there was a few talking to him at the time. He says, well, you'd get the other side of the story if you went to Gadsden.
And spoke to the elders.
And spoke to the elders there. So I came down here and I rang Larry Johnson, one of the elders on that committee, and I said I'd like to meet with you in connection with the Raymond Franz case. Told him I was from Ireland and that I'd only got a couple of days and that I'd like to meet him tomorrow night after the meeting, which was a Tuesday night. So he said okay, that was alright. So after the meeting I met with Larry and with Theodis French. He was also on that committee. And what struck me was that, they were very young men. In my consideration, they were young men. I only reckon they would be about, Theodis would be about 35 years of age. He just seemed young. And that struck me as unusual for two men on a committee to ruin a man's life, to be so young and seemingly so inexperienced. But I sat down with them and I said that the way that they handled the Raymond Franz affair had disturbed the brothers greatly in Ireland, and that I was over here and I was representing about 100 brothers. And that we had gone to our elders, and the elders just couldn't help us on this issue. So they brought in the circuit overseer and so on, and Martin has told the story what happened in Dublin. And I said that the branch sent to America, and Jack Barr came over, and it's on his authority that I am here now in Gadsden, that he said if I come to Gadsden that we'd get the other side of the story. So I asked him, could you help me to see what was the actual way we read of the case through. And they says, well, you've only got one side of the story, Larry Johnson says. He said, it was Raymond Franz's side of the story you've got. And it's obviously slanted. And this was a committee meeting, and it was private, and that we're not going to discuss it with anybody. So I said, but it's not private anymore. We all know about it in Ireland. And up till then he didn't know that, I had this file which contained all the letters that Raymond Franz had written to the Gadsden elders, and all the letters they had written back to Raymond Franz, and even the letters that Raymond Franz had written to Brooklyn, looking for clarification to the September Watchtower on disassociated persons. So I took out the file and I says, we have all the information here about this case. And I think that surprised them, I really don't think they knew they expected that. I said, so what we're talking about now is not private anymore, which I said, unfortunately it has disturbed all the brothers in Ireland. I says, at least 3 congregations are very disturbed about it. And I says, I'd like to go through it with you. And he says, well, what's your questions? I says, well, the obvious haste with which the case is being handled. And I took out a letter and I showed, Larry, there's your signature, and I says, Theodis, there's your signature. So Theodis says, well, we're not going to go through this. This is a private and confidential matter. He says, and you're wasting my time, and you're wasting your time. And he got up and left the room.
After 6,000 miles travelling to the other side of the world.
I was shocked. Like, I've been in discussions with my own elders, and they've rang me up asking me to come and meet them, and they'll try to help me with my answers. Now, I was actually shocked. So I had to shout out the door after him. I says, that's disgraceful behaviour for a Christian. I says, I come over here hoping to go back to my brothers back home and tell the branch that everything is not as we see it in the file, that we have a slanted view. But instead I've got to go back and tell them that you've walked out on me. Now I had to shout that out the door because he was gone. So he came back in the room then, and he says, we handled the case according to procedure. He says, everything we've done was according to procedure, and Brooklyn know of it, and they've got this file. And if they're not going to discuss this with you, neither are we. I says, okay. I says, listen, I'm sorry for having to shout out after you. I says, I'm trying not to get upset, but I've only got a few days here. I says, this is affecting my family, and it's affecting the congregations. And I says, just sit down, because he still hadn't sat down. I says, just sit down, and I'll go through the papers. And you don't have to say anything, but just tell me if I have the whole story. So I didn't give them a chance to reply to that, so I started to go through the papers. I took out some of the papers that weren't directly involved with the case. So I says, one question that's disturbing the brothers is, why the obvious haste in this committee? Why did you rush through it with such haste? And they says, you know, we didn't rush through it. We'd done everything. We get Raymond Franz. We bent over backwards is the words they used for Raymond Franz. I says, but Raymond Franz wrote to Brooklyn for clarification to that Watchtower article, because it put disassociated persons in the class of disfellowship persons, no matter what the reason they disassociated for. And he said that affected him in Gadsden and many others. So I took out the letter that he had sent to the committee, saying that he had written to Brooklyn and that he was waiting on a reply. And I took out the letter of their reply to that, and I read it to them. I just don't have it here. And they said in the letter, we acknowledge that you have written to Brooklyn about this matter, but we have decided to continue with the case. So I says, you didn't even wait. He says, well, Brooklyn didn't answer. And I says to him, you've dated this letter a couple of days after Ray sent you that one. You didn't even give them a chance to answer. So I don't think they really liked that. They knew then that I had a whole case. And they says, we're not discussing this. It's a private matter. It's confidential. We went by procedure. We went through the organisational procedure of things, which you should do. You should be leaving this to your elders. I says, we've left it to our elders. The elders brought in the branch and circuit overseer. They brought in brothers from Brooklyn, and they've not been able to help us. So I'm here now asking you to help us, please. And I said to them, really, I didn't come over here to create trouble. I came over here to hoping that these letters are not all that there is to the case. And they said, well, you've got all the letters, they says. And if Brooklyn isn't going to discuss it, we're not going to discuss it again. I says, listen, Jesus would leave the flock, he said, just to go after one sheep. I says, even if we have to step outside of procedure, just to help the brothers in Ireland, wouldn't it be worth it if we helped one or two? They says, listen, any John Doe who goes off with a circuit overseer's wife, we're not going to go up into the congregation and tell them about it. He says, and we're not going to go through this because someone in Ireland has a question on it. I says, but it's not just someone in Ireland. I says, it's over 100 brothers who I'm representing here today. Because there's over 100 brothers asking the particular questions, but I'm sure there's hundreds more who want them answered. And I says, it's not a private matter. I've got the file here in front of me. Well, you've got the file, that's all there is to it. You don't need any explanation for it. He says, if you're losing your faith, and if the brothers in Ireland hadn't been loyal over this issue, well, they haven't got much faith to talk about. I says to him, I was shocked. I've never experienced anything like it.
I'd like to put them down in County Cork for a couple of weeks and see how strong their faith would be.
Yeah. But I says to them, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe that you're saying this to me. I've really come over here looking for your help, and you're turning me away. And they says, we're not discussing it any further with you. There's no point. You have the file, and that's all there is. And that was it. They just wouldn't go through it with me. And I says, well, I'm really sorry it's come down to this, because now I know, I've come down myself and I've seen it for myself, that if you're not going to go through it with me, I says, there must be something to hide. I says, if you're hiding something, all you've got to do is just sit there and I'll go through the papers and you just tell me if there's something missing, and that'll satisfy me. But they just wouldn't even do it. So that was it. So since then, there's another elder in that who was associated with that congregation, who's rang up and he wants to see us tomorrow. So I'm going to go and see him tomorrow. And he said that the way they handled it was wrong, that they shouldn't have handled it in that way. So I'd rather not give that elder's name as yet, because we'll see what happens after tomorrow. But I must say, I have never been so shocked. Up to now, I've hoped that the organisation was okay. I could see there was certain things wrong, but I couldn't see any other way as being better. I could see that there was questions needing answering, and I myself was doing my own research and study, which I think all of us should, because if we resolve it ourselves, and if we find out the answers and questions, well then we'll be better people for it. But I think now that there's no avenue that we can hope to go to get these questions resolved. So I really am personally finished with the organisational procedure of things. Those men have proven to me that the community that we associate with is not as Christian as we'd like to think it. So that's where I am.
This is a little scrap of paper that Brother Martin had to get out of the circuit overseer, E.G. Watt. It took him 3.5 hours just to get this little scrap of paper, 3 hours just to get him to write it out, and another half hour just to get a signature on it. It's kind of interesting that he didn't want to put anything in writing. It kind of makes us rather suspicious of anyone that doesn't want to put anything on paper at all.